We're diving straight into a fascinating stack of notes today, labeled Dynaxiom 3391 through 3400, and it's all about you.
Yeah, your creativity, your internal world.
Exactly. It's this incredibly interconnected map of how human creativity actually works, the psychological traps of modern technology, and the really fluid nature of what gives your life meaning.
It connects things you wouldn't expect.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with how we actually perceive the world, because entry 3397 presents this very specific lens on creativity.
But the photography comparison.
Yeah, it basically argues that if you're a good photographer, you're a good writer, because they're doing the exact same job.
Which, I mean, it sounds like a massive stretch at first.
Totally.
But if you look at the actual mechanism of what both artists are doing, it makes sense. You're taking a medium made of words, right, and a medium made of light, and you're drawing a Venn diagram of their core attributes.
And right in the center is observation.
Relentless observation, like a photographer walks down just a normal, boring city street and notices the way a shadow sharply cuts across a brick wall.
Well, everyone else just walks right past it.
Exactly. They isolate it.
Because they're hunting for contrast.
Right.
And the entry is saying a writer is doing that exact same hunt, just, with human behavior or syntax instead of light.
They notice the weird shadow in a conversation.
Right.
That shared curiosity is the universal creative engine. And the text pushes this cross-pollination into other domains, too, which I love.
A music example, right?
Yeah. It points out that in music, you can play instruments like other instruments. Like you can play a guitar with the phrasing and breath-like pauses of a saxophone, or you can slap a bass like it's a percussive drum. The logic is that if you adopt the behavioral mechanics of a sax player while holding a guitar, you kind of fundamentally become a sax player in that moment.
I see that in sports all the time, actually, which the author touches on. Like pro baseball players becoming scratch golfers.
Right. The domain changes, but the underlying mechanism is the same.
The kinetic chain of rotational power, the hand-eye coordination, it's identical. But there's a practical danger here, I think. If creativity is born from this really intense outward observation of shadows and rhythms, how do you process it on the inside without just, losing your mind?
Ah, the internal dialogue.
Right. And I actually have to push back a little on the author's logic in entry 3396.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because we're usually told that talking to yourself, like really isolating yourself in your own head, is a sign you're sort of unraveling.
Sure, that's the stereotype.
But this entry argues it's the most essential tool you have. Like, is this just a defense mechanism for introverts, or is it like a built-in editor?
It is absolutely an essential function. Like, the entry argues that writing, or really any deep creative work, requires you to sit alone in the chamber of your own thought patterns.
Just you and your thoughts.
You have to speak to yourself first. And the entity listening to you in that chamber, it isn't a hallucination, it's your internal editor. It's the cognitive sorting mechanism that tells you if an idea is actually good or if it's just noise. And what's really cool is how the text connects this deeply human process to modern tech.
The AI comparison.
Yeah. It points out that large language models, LLMs, are essentially mimicking this exact internal chamber.
Wait, really? So when you're prompting an AI, you're not talking to a machine, you're like externalizing that internal editor.
Structurally, yes. Think about how an LLM actually works mechanically.
Okay.
It doesn't quote-unquote think. It predicts tokens based on huge patterns of human language. So when you bounce an idea off it, it's acting as a synthetic, externalized sounding board.
Huh.
That back-and-forth dialogue forces you to articulate your premise so clearly that you end up discovering hidden patterns in your own thinking.
The machine is just reflecting you back to you.
Exactly. It reflects your cognitive architecture.
Which totally shifts how we should look at heavy intellectual work. Like, if you're just playing with patterns, it doesn't have to be a slog.
No, not at all.
Entry 3399 makes this point beautifully. We usually expect deep philosophy to have this somber, heavy academic weight to it, right?
Very serious.
Yeah. But the text suggests that philosophy is structurally just a form of wordplay.
Which is such a brilliant, liberating reframe. If you treat deep philosophical observation as a form of poetry, you change the whole neurochemistry of the work. It becomes playful.
And the entry connects that to songwriting, right?
Yeah. It notes that this kind of philosophical poetry is historically joined at the hip with songwriting. A musician can take a genuinely depressing philosophical observation about mortality.
The heavy stuff.
Right. Wrap it in an uplifting major chord progression and turn it into a pop song. It's that internal dialogue manifesting into the world in a way people can actually digest.
But there is a massive trap in how we manifest those ideas, which Entry 3391 really warns us about.
The beauty trap.
Yes, the concept of beauty. The note argues that a preoccupation with making things beautiful can actually be a dangerous distraction.
It's limiting.
If I'm getting the mechanism right, forcing beauty is like trying to write a whole book using only happy words. You completely neuter your own vocabulary.
You lose all your tension. If you elevate beauty above everything else in your aesthetic framework, you automatically filter out ideas that are raw or jagged or uncomfortable.
Which are sometimes the best ones.
Exactly. The potentially far more powerful ones, you shrink your creative universe. But the entry is incredibly careful to warn against the inverse trap, too.
Right, the cynical artist,
Yeah.
the one who refuses to make anything beautiful because they think beauty is inherently shallow.
Yeah, or commercial. And by doing that, they fall into the exact same trap of limitation.
They shrink their universe again.
Right. If you rigidly ignore beauty, you lose one of the most powerful points of contrast available to the human mind.
Because you need the light to show the dark.
Sometimes beauty, just entirely for the sake of itself, is the only way to contextualize the heavier elements of a piece of work. It's about not letting rigid aesthetic roles shut down that dynamic internal dialogue.
Okay, so if living a full creative life requires maintaining this rich internal editor and observing shadows and balancing beauty with darkness, how do we actually sustain that engine over an entire lifespan?
Without burning out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do we not just go numb to the world? The author maps out a survival strategy for this in Entry 3398.
Routine versus rotation.
Yes, drawing a sharp line between those two. And the distinction is incredibly practical. A routine is something like brushing your teeth or paying your taxes, right?
That's necessary friction.
But a rotation is like having a favorite playlist where no matter how many times you hear a specific song, the bridge still hits you right in the chest.
What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanism of that feeling. Entirely. Rotation contains active, regenerative joy. Routine often drains your energy, but rotation replenishes it.
Like the music example again?
Yeah, the text points out that rotation is central to how we consume art and music. Look at Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody.
Classic.
The entry explicitly notes that it remains in heavy rotation on Spotify decades after its release. People don't just tolerate hearing it, they actively seek out that specific auditory architecture again and again.
Because it triggers a reliable, positive neurochemical response.
Exactly. And the same applies to visual art. Meaningful rotation is having a painting on your wall, not just to cover a blank space, but because there's a specific tiny detail in the brushwork that you deliberately look forward to revisiting every single morning.
It's an active, joyous repetition.
Yes.
And keeping that specific kind of joy in rotation has a literal physical effect on how we move through time.
This is where it gets really profound.
Entry 3394 connects this concept directly to the aging process. It basically states that we age along the most youthful parts of ourselves.
That might be the most profound psychological insight in this entire stack of notes.
It's wild to think about.
The mechanism is simple but brutal, If you mentally concede that you have become old at heart, you will physically and cognitively age faster than peers who maintain their youthfulness.
The text brings up Emmy van Duerzen.
Yes, as a prime example, a woman still out there singing and performing in her 70s.
It's heavily dependent on the specific era you anchor your inner self to, isn't it? The text makes this brilliant generational observation about the 1960s versus the 1940s.
Yeah, it's about the cultural zeitgeist you encode into your neuroplasticity during your formative years.
Like when you're a teenager.
Exactly. The text suggests that if you were in your teens or 20s during the 1960s and 70s, you were immersed in an era defined by rebellion, fluidity, breaking boundaries.
Very specific vibe.
And if you lock that specific youthful vibe into your personal rotation, you carry a resilient, flexible energy throughout your life.
Versus the 40s.
Right. Contrast that with someone who spent their formative years in the 1940s and 50s. That was a much more rigid, conformist cultural operating system. You age along the exact lines of the joy and the vibe you choose to keep in your rotation.
But if maintaining that fluid joy, like keeping your own personal playlist in rotation is the ultimate goal, why is it so incredibly hard for us to actually pull off?
Because the world gets in the way.
Right. This is where the notes pivot from the internal mind to the external world that constantly tries to crush it. Let's look at Entry 3392.
The pressure of the tribe.
Yeah. We get so overwhelmed by what we're supposed to do that we completely lose the signal of what we are actually supposed to do.
This is the eternal friction between the individual's internal editor and the collective weight of society.
It's exhausting.
The entry boils us down to the mechanics of choice. When you make a decision in your life, are you making it based on a deep, fundamental understanding of your own unique traits? Or are you making it for the tribe?
Are you just trying not to get kicked out of the village?
Basically. Are you just executing a script designed to satisfy the group's expectations?
There's actually a wild meta note from the author embedded right in this entry about that.
Oh, about the AI summary.
Yeah. They mentioned that their original nuanced thought about the tribe wasn't included in an LLM summary they had run on their own notes.
Right.
And they realized it's because LLMs only use what's in the model. They can't read your mind to find the missing context.
Which serves as a flawless metaphor for human social behavior.
Also.
Well, systems, whether we're talking about artificial intelligence or human social structures, they can only reflect the data they are fed.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you constantly feed your own life with the tribe's expectations and you suppress your internal editor, your outward behavior is only going to reflect the tribe.
You become a predictive token of your social group.
Yes. You lose your individual signal entirely.
And when you scale that loss of individual signal up to a global level, the infrastructure gets terrifying. Here's where it gets really interesting, because entry 3395 and 3393 explore how righteous community-building intentions can go disastrously off the rails.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to examine the digital infrastructure that dictates our modern rotation.
The algorithms.
Exactly. Entry 3395 uses Facebook as the ultimate case study. The original stated intentions of Facebook might have been genuinely righteous,
Give people a tool to connect, build a global community.
Right. But systems possess their own inherent logic that can corrupt the intentions of their creators. The entry defines our current social media landscape as the ubiquitous infrastructure of surveillance capitalism.
Which is a term that gets thrown around a lot as a buzzword, but the actual mechanics of it are deeply invasive. It's not just about, showing you targeted sneaker ads.
Not at all. The mechanism of surveillance capitalism operates by systematically extracting, predicting, and modifying human behavior for corporate profit.
It's modifying us.
Think about what this does to the internal dialogue we were just praising. This economic model takes the deepest, most private parts of your inner life.
Your secret anxieties.
Your unvoiced motives, the things you only whisper to your internal editor. It strips them down into raw data and then feeds that data back to you as a trigger.
Subtly modifying your behavior tomorrow to benefit a shareholder.
The righteous intentions went completely off the rails, and as the text notes, there is no easy way to put that evil genie back in the bottle.
And the ultimate metric for success in that extracted system is virality, which entry 3393 absolutely tears apart.
Oh, it goes hard on virality.
It explicitly warns that if something is viral, it is highly likely to make a massive amount of people sick.
Because the sickness isn't biological, right? It's a psychological contagion.
It spreads like a virus.
The algorithm's only goal is engagement, and anger or anxiety are the most engaging human emotions. The entry goes as far as to warn that pushed to their extreme, these engagement algorithms and the AI systems built on top of them effectively act as weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction? That's heavy.
They weaponize the tribe's expectations and fears directly against the individual's inner peace.
So, take a step back and look at the psychological toll of this. You have constant surveillance, the crushing pressure of the tribe, algorithms treating your private motives as raw materials.
They do a lot of friction.
All of this friction brings us directly to the heaviest, grandest concept in the entire source material.
The meaning crisis.
Yes. Let's dig into entry 3400. So, what does this all mean? I have to challenge the author's framing here a bit.
Go for it.
The entry talks deeply about the search for meaning. But if our digital world is mutating at this blinding exponential speed, isn't it completely absurd to try and anchor our lives to ancient, slow-moving virtues?
It's a massive structural question, for sure, and the text brings in the framework of cognitive scientist John Vervaeke to anchor it.
Okay.
Vervaeke talks extensively about axial age traditions, like the bedrock philosophies, Greek Stoicism, Buddhism, the Abrahamic religions.
The old reliable systems.
Right. For centuries, these traditions function as technologies of wisdom. They provided human beings with a structural narrative, a reliable operating system for processing suffering, purpose, and meaning.
But today we have the internet.
Exactly. Today we live in an environment of relentless, weaponized information overload.
And that sheer volume of data physically breaks the machinery we use to process reality.
Yes. The text uses a very specific phrase for this: our relevance realization machinery.
Relevance realization machinery.
It's the cognitive sorting algorithm in your brain that tells you what actually matters in your environment.
Like what's signal and what's noise.
Right. When your relevance realization machinery is constantly flooded by algorithmic manipulation, global anxieties, or the shallow dopamine-driven reward system of viral likes, it short circuits.
You just can't sort it anymore.
You lose the ability to tell signal from noise. That intense vulnerability inevitably leads to nihilism or latching onto conspiracy theories or addictive behaviors.
We frantically do things that feel meaningful for a fleeting second online.
But they don't orient us toward actual sustainable flourishing.
But the text makes a crucial point here, I think. Flourishing is a constantly moving target.
It changes every decade.
Yeah, the author talks about having to make a deliberate, concerted effort to mentally relive the 1970s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, just to remind themselves of how wildly different their definitions of meaning and flourishing were in each of those decades.
Because every era has its own context.
Every single era creates new mediums, which in turn create new messages and new anxieties.
Which perfectly addresses your skepticism about ancient virtues.
Right.
The entry explicitly states that attempting to model our complex future based on the perceived simplified virtues of an ancient past is almost silly.
It's romanticizing the past.
It's a trap. The text notes this collective cultural desire right now to return to a sort of meekness. It's a reactionary urge to turn away from the very science and technology that generated the modern comforts we all rely on.
Because we forget that every age had its own brutal inequalities.
The author asks a brilliant, piercing question about this. Were people sitting around having existential discussions about a meaning crisis in the 1950s?
Almost certainly not. Or, as the text playfully suggests, they just didn't have the internet. So they lacked the global broadcasting infrastructure required for every single person to simultaneously complain about their lack of meaning.
Precisely. And unpacking that historical illusion leads us to the ultimate aha moment in this entire stack of notes.
The big reveal.
After dissecting surveillance capitalism and ancient wisdom, the author makes a remarkably bold, counterintuitive claim. We have already solved the meaning crisis.
Wait, I need to pause on that. Solved it how? If our relevance realization machinery is broken and everyone is miserable online, how can the text claim it's solved?
Because we are fundamentally misunderstanding what meaning is.
Okay.
We are searching for meaning as if it is a solid, static, permanent monolith that we can just find and permanently possess.
Like a trophy.
Right. But the very first line of entry 3400 shatters that. It says, there's never one solid sense of meaning. What gives your life intense meaning today might be completely meaningless to you next year or even tomorrow afternoon. The author has this profound realization that their life feels the most meaningful simply when they stumble across something interesting and take the time to investigate it.
So meaning isn't some grand destiny, it's just curiosity. It's exactly like the photographer from the very first entry, just noticing the shadow on the wall.
Yes, it is the exact same mechanism. And if you investigate that shadow or that idea, and it ultimately turns out to be unfulfilling, you might temporarily feel like life has lost its meaning.
Which is normal.
But the text argues that a general lack of meaning doesn't mean you are broken. It simply means you haven't looked at something interesting lately.
That is so freeing.
True meaning is found in incredibly fleeting moments. The author gives a very grounded example. Just seeing a clever piece of design or noticing a beautifully executed piece of architecture.
Just a little detail.
Simply acknowledging that cleverness, being present for that tiny flash of human ingenuity, gives their day meaning, even if it evaporates a minute later.
The text says, if you add up all those little moments, you can say your life had meaning in it. That is such a quiet, powerful shift in perspective.
It takes the pressure off entirely.
It really does. But it does leave a lingering, difficult question. Is a life composed of meaningful moments the exact same thing as a meaningful life? Like, if you just aggressively tick off a bucket list of cool experiences, is that actually enough?
The author wrestles with that, answering maybe. It will depend on the moment. But the text successfully identifies the core psychological conflict that prevents us from actually enjoying those fleeting moments in the first place.
The tribe again.
The author observes that most people are suffering from a painful, constant cognitive dissonance. We collectively label this dissonance the meaning crisis, and we usually blame it entirely on technology or the government.
But it's closer to home.
The root cause is far more intimate. The root cause is that people actively allow the tribe to define what meaning is for them because they are deeply terrified of being socially ostracized.
They abandon their own moments.
They abandon their own individually meaningful, fleeting moments, like enjoying a strange piece of architecture, to chase the group's sanitized definition of a meaningful life.
They completely abandon their own internal editor just to appease the algorithm in the village. Okay, to quickly recap the terrain, these 10 axioms just dragged us across. We started with the realization that true creativity requires observing the world with the precise, contrasting eye of a photographer, and nurturing that internal dialogue without forcing it to be perfectly beautiful.
Right.
We saw the physical and mental danger of letting our youthful joy, our heavy rotation, get ground down by mundane routines and the suffocating expectations of the tribe.
We looked at the dark mechanics of how surveillance capitalism and viral algorithms extract our private motives to weaponize our anxieties.
And finally, we arrived at this incredibly liberating idea that the grand meaning crisis is a bit of a tribal illusion. Meaning isn't some ancient, heavy monolith you have to carry. It is simply the accumulation of fleeting, clever, interesting moments that you deliberately choose to notice.
This raises an important question for you to consider as you step back out into the physical world today.
Okay.
If the definition of meaning changes daily, and if we truly age along the specific parts of ourselves that we keep youthful through joyous rotation, look at your life right now. What is one piece of rotation, one song, one habit, one strange obsession with a shadow on a brick wall that you are doing entirely 100% for yourself and absolutely not for the tribe?
Keep observing the intersections of your own life. We'll leave you with that.